Pleasant afternoon. Spring is coming. You can see the plum blossoms behind me. So we'll see what happens in the next few months. But what I want to look at today is the construction division of the CFMEU, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, because we've seen some extraordinary things happen over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Quite extraordinary. Now, in this country we're supposed to have laws, due process and not trial by media. Now, every organisation on the planet, whether it's small or large, has its issues. Some obviously have corruption, others don't, others have internal divisions. But the dilemma is, at least in Australian society, that theoretically there are mechanisms via which you can deal with this particular situation. Now, when the media, the corporate-owned media, did its hysterical analysis of the construction division of the CFMEU, one of the most successful unions in this country, one of the few that is actually functioning in 2024 because of a range of legislation which has basically made unions irrelevant in this country. For example, as we saw with the protest a few days ago, you cannot take part in an unauthorised stoppage without being fined $10,000 a day. That's the individual worker as well as the union. You can only withdraw your labour in this country during an enterprise bargaining agreement after you jump through all these hoops, passed a vote amongst the membership. Now, I wonder it takes years to actually come up with a new log of claims, an agreement to be reached, because all the aces are in the employer's hands or the state's hands. Then we've got the ridiculous situation where the introduction of short-term contracts, the gig economy, contract workers, all means that it's difficult for people to belong to a trade union in this country. And no wonder over the last 10 years or so, or 20 years, since the introduction of most of this legislative agenda, we've seen wages go backwards and conditions slide. It's illegal to have a picket line. That's right. It goes on and on. If you're involved in an occupation, you can be jailed for up to 20 years. So you've got all this background to this current dispute. Now, obviously, irrespective of the legislative agenda and 3 royal commissions, the construction division of the CFMEU has been able to expand and, more importantly, provide significant initiatives, significant reforms, significant wages for its membership, because it uses its collective strength. So the construction division of the CFMEU has been in the firing line now for over 2 decades. As I said, we've had 3 royal commissions. We had the building industrial group, which, legislation was passed, which has now been temporarily scrapped, which allowed the building industrial commission to actually interview people without legal representation, and if they refused to answer questions they could be jailed. Now, obviously, because of all these draconian laws, most workers have kept their place, and that's the whole purpose of the laws. But now let's look at what's happened in the last few decades. We've had a royal commission into the aged care sector, which came to the conclusion that the privately owned aged care sector wasn't worth spitting on. We had a royal commission into the banking sector who found that the financial games being played by the banking sector were illegal. We saw the introduction of robo-debt by the Morrison-led Liberal National Party, which was an illegal mechanism by which to steal money from working people. We've seen the mining sector pay minimal taxation. And the list goes on and on. Have any administrators been appointed to these organisations which have done extraordinary amount of harm? But no. What we saw in the corporate-owned media were allegations. I can make any allegation I like. And the problem with the corporate-owned media, when you have the government-gelded ABC riding on its back, and if you listen to most of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, they've brought the story lock, stock and barrel. So what we see is a classical example of trial by media. Now obviously the government, concerned about a federal election which needs to be held before May 2025, concerned about the media pylon, and that's all it was, a media pylon, call for the appointment of administrators to the construction division of the CFMEU. Now I don't think most people realise that Cbus, one of Australia's most successful superannuation company, has also been put in administration. $85 billion of workers' funds put into administrations, as well as the union. Now the administrator has extraordinary powers to be able to fire people. Now, when we saw the Royal Commission into the aged care sector, into the financial sector, the Royal Commission into Robodeck, were any administrators appointed? No. Did anybody ever go to jail? No. Was anybody ever charged? No. But because these allegations regarding the so-called bully boy tactics of the construction division of the CFMEU, we see these administrators appointed. Now normally you would have a legal redress, but when both houses of Parliament collude and pass legislation, which to the Greens' credit they didn't support, which put the CFMEU into administration, what happened is that every legal right that organisations like the CFMEU enjoy, or any organisation enjoy in this country, has now been put at risk because of trial by media. Today it was the CFMEU, tomorrow it may be another union, it may be another organisation. And because of the clamour for action and the appointment of administrators, if it's an organisation which provides some resistance to the government and the opposition's agenda and the corporate sector's agenda, the same thing could happen to them. And that's the dilemma. It's not just the fact that construction division of the CFMEU has been put to administration, but the fact that any organisation in this country can be put in administration. Let's not forget that after the 9/11 outrage, let's not forget that legislation was passed in this country, extraordinary legislation which has been used in some cases, which meant that individuals and small groups had no protection from the arbitrary exercise of state power. Under our current legislative framework, the government can ban any organisation if it's deemed to be a threat. Deemed to be. Banned. And if members of that organisation continue to function, they can be jailed for up to 25 years. Their assets are seized. If you inadvertently have some information that may assist the authorities in their investigations, you can be kidnapped off the street by the Australian Federal Police or ASIO. You can be questioned for up to 7 days, and if you refuse to answer questions, you can be jailed for up to 5 years. This is legislation that we have in this country because of the lack of constitutional protections for the individual against the arbitrary exercise of state power. And what we've seen with the construction division of the CFMEU is the same type of mentality and legislative agenda which can occur in this country. Because of all the major Western powers, we are one of the few countries, sovereign nation states in the Western world, which has no protection for the individual under the arbitrary exercise of state power. I mean, the Australian Constitution says very little about any right. It is basically a constitution which was set up to allow the federation of 6 independent colonial entities into one sovereign nation state in 1901. The only freedoms you have under the Australian Constitution, if you call them freedom, is the possible freedom of religious expression, the freedom to be compensated. That's right, to be compensated if the state takes your land or your assets, to be fairly compensated. That's 2 freedoms. Trial by jury for a major crime. 3 and 4, this is a nice one, that you cannot be discriminated against because of the state you live in or the state you were born in. And that occurred because the federation occurred between 6 independent colonial entities. And they wanted that in the Constitution. Nothing about freedom of speech. Nothing about freedom of association. Nothing regarding your ability to enjoy your life without the threat of the arbitrary exercise of state power. Now, obviously, in a situation like today, where resistance to the state and the state agenda is minuscule, I mean, I can talk like this today because obviously I'm not a threat to anybody. But if I was, there is the legislative agenda in place which could put me away for decades. Today's the CFMEU, the construction division. Tomorrow it could be you. And if you think it can't happen to you, think again. Constitutional arrangements which do not protect the individual from the arbitrary exercise of state power mean that we are all potential victims. As soon as we pose a real threat to the status quo, like the construction division of the CFMEU, we can be legislated away. Extraordinary situation, a country that claims it's free, with this freedom of expression, freedom to protest. You know, there's no rights. They're minimal. I explained about them before. So, what's the point of having due process when that due process can be legislated away? What's the point of having so-called freedom of speech and the ability to choose representatives every 3 to 4 years when that can be legislated away? So we face a real issue. I'm not saying there aren't bad eggs in the construction division of the CFMEU. I'm not saying there may not even be criminal infiltration in sections of the CFMEU. I don't know. Allegations have been made. Now, these allegations should have been tested in court, because there's a difference between criminal behaviour and bullying. We've now reached a stage in this country where we think that actions which are not criminal behaviour is somehow criminal. And that's a central issue that we face today. What's the point of having laws if we bypass those laws to suit the current political, social, cultural agenda situation we find of ourselves in? There's no point whatsoever. So irrespective of what you think of the construction division of this CFMEU, irrespective of what you think of their tactics, irrespective of whether they've been infiltrated by criminal elements, the fact is the very laws that have been put in place to protect us have been cast aside. The organisation has been put into administration. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. People will be dealt with without the ability to go to court. Either it's in civil action or criminal action. Now, I am quite certain the damage which was done by the financial sector in this country, has outlined in the recent Royal Commission the damage which has been done to return servicemen and women in the suicide inquiry Royal Commission, the damage that has been done to individuals and families and groups within the aged care sector, the damage which led to suicide in some cases, which was done by the robo-debt fiasco, is much, 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 much more than any damage that's been done by the construction division of the CFMEU. The damage they have done is they've been able to extract the maximum return for their members for the work they do by collectively bargaining, by continuing to act as a trade union. Behaviour which is described as bullying can in many regards be seen as nothing else than protecting yourself against the excesses of the other side. And the list goes on and on. So I'm not going to look at individual situations, but not only was the Victorian division of the CFMEU and the New South Wales division put into administration, but every division, including the Queensland, West Australian, South Australian division and divisions within Tasmania. These are independent divisions within a wider network. This is total overkill. It's using a sledgehammer to crack a peanut. But the dilemma is that this has ramifications for each and every one of us. Whether we're a member of a trade union, whether we are a member of an association or organisation, this has implications for each and every one of us. And while we live in a society where there is no protection for the individual from the arbitrary exercise of state power as far as our constitutional arrangements are concerned, where citizens are not able to change the constitution through citizens-initiated referendums, then we will continue to find ourselves in the firing line. As I said at the beginning, today it's the CFMEU. We don't know who it'll be tomorrow, but the fact is that any section of society that challenges the status quo, any section of society that challenges the private investment for private profit mantra, which is in the DNA of this country, will find that the corporate-owned media, assisted by virtual platforms, will frighten governments into withdrawing freedoms which are nothing more than freedoms which are written in the sky. They're not real, they never will be real until we have the ability to change our constitutional arrangements through citizens-initiated referendums.